Welcome back to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith & Jones podcast. I'm your host, Tabitha, and today we are covering episode 5, The Girl in Boxcar number 3. Okay, so here's what happened. The production schedule in season 1 kinda got away from them, so Roy Huggins used his reliable old Maverick trick by splitting up Hayes and Curry. That way Pete could shoot one episode, while Ben could shoot another at the same time. That's pretty much the whole reason that a second, and then a third, and then a fourth Maverick relative was created in the first place, so they could film multiple episodes at once, and the Mavericks would only team up occasionally. As a result, for this show, there are about 5 episodes where Hayes and Kid are separated for most, if not all of it. And I say about 5 because I'm not sure the 5th one really counts, and if it does, they pulled it off better than the other 4. Now, this tactic is fine for Maverick because it was always pitched as a lone character show, and James Garner was James Garner. He was just naturally likable and charismatic, and there's a reason he got famous. He could carry it alone. But Alias Smith & Jones was a buddy show from its inception, and any kind of a buddy or even a romance show lives and dies on the chemistry between its leads. I mean, did you like seasons 8 or 9 of The X-Files? Would you have watched Starsky? Would you have watched The Odd Person? How about No One and Shirley? Oh, wait, they actually did that in the last season, didn't they? Or how about Will and himself, the gay lawyer with no roommate? Hell, that problem would be the downfall of this very show after Pete Duell passed away. My point is, I get why they had these episodes for scheduling purposes, and I can't blame them for that. But the writing is not strong enough to make them that interesting. I'm here to see Hayes and the Kid interact with each other. They are a team. They are partners. They work together. Seeing one of them go it alone does not work for me. And if they had to do this, they could have at least, spread them out a bit more. Instead, 3 of them come one right after the other. So the next few episodes of this podcast are going to be a slog for me, and I'm going to do my very best to find something worthwhile in them so that it won't be a slog for you. Having said all that, The Girl in Boxcar number 3 is not the worst of the bunch, and this is a kid-centric episode, so let's just get to our facts, shall we? This episode was shot in mid-January 1971 and aired February 11th, 1971. This episode also does not give Roy Huggins a writing credit. Instead, the story credit goes to, get this, Gene Roddenberry. Yes, that Gene Roddenberry. And the teleplay was by Howard Brown. The episode was directed by Leslie M. Martinson. Now, I'm sure I don't need to tell you about Gene Roddenberry's career. He's the creator of Star Trek, an extremely popular, influential, and long-running sci-fi franchise that is still going today. There are parts of it that I love, there are parts of it that I don't love. He also created Andromeda, which is not good, but my stepdad watched the entire thing because he hates me, I guess. On IMDb, this episode of ASJ is his first post-Star Trek credit, and it's his only ASJ credit. That's probably for the best. But he did have experience writing for other westerns before this, such as 24 episodes of Had Gun Will Travel, another show my stepdad loves, and an episode of The Virginian called Runaway Home, which has the same plot as this episode. What I'm saying is, Gene Roddenberry didn't actually work on Alias Smith & Jones. Huggins just took the basic outline of that script and made it fit into the ASJ world. He shortened down the 90-minute Virginian episode into a 60-minute ASJ episode. So all that stuff I said about Gene Roddenberry for mostly no reason, but I still think it's noteworthy. He still wrote the story, even if it was for another show, and I said I would bring up Star Trek every chance I got, didn't I? Howard Brown, the writer of the teleplay, also wrote it for The Virginian, so even though no writing credit goes to Huggins in this episode, it looks like he did all the work of changing it from The Virginian to ASJ. But what the hell, I'll tell you about Howard Brown anyway. Brown had worked for Huggins before. He wrote 10 episodes of Maverick, 6 of The Virginian, and 1 for The Fugitive. All shows that Huggins was in charge on at one time or another. Brown also wrote for Mission Impossible, Mannix, and 77 Sunset Strip. He also wrote a movie about Al Capone, very cleverly titled Capone, in 1975. He does have one more ASJ credit, but is it real or is it another Virginian fake out? We'll find out when we get to it. Oh, and according to IMDb, he was also the editor of Amazing Stories, the sci-fi magazine in the 50s, and I think that's pretty cool. Okay, let's get to someone who actually worked on this episode and not that episode of The Virginian. The director! Shirley Leslie H. Martinson actually directed this episode, and Huggins didn't just take his notes and tell Pete and Ben to do what they say, right? Right? I want to believe. There's no Virginian credit on his IMDb page, so I think we're safe. Martinson was a journalist before coming to California to become a director. He had a lot of experience with westerns, too. He directed for The Roy Rogers Show, Tales of Wells Fargo, Sugarfoot, Cheyenne, and 18 episodes of, say it with me, Maverick. He also directed 2 episodes of Batman, as well as Batman the Movie, the Adam West one, of course. He worked with Pete Duell again on the 1971 TV movie How to Steal an Airplane. He worked on Love, American Style, Mission Impossible, Mannix, The Brady Bunch of all things, Chips, and the TV movie Rescue from Gilligan's Island. Tragically, his last IMDb credit is 26 episodes of Small Wonder. Speaking of Gilligan's Island, this episode guest stars Alan Hale, aka the Skipper, as the attorney Andrew Greer. And I know what you're thinking. Once you've played the Skipper, does any other role matter? And the answer is no. No, of course not. Except for one, and that would be the sheriff in Giant Spider Invasion. Another great episode of Mystery Science Theater. I'm sorry, I kid him. Alan Hale had a very long career, beginning in the 1930s, and he did have a couple of other series besides Gilligan's Island. Biff Baker USA, about a husband and wife spy team, and Casey Jones, about a train guy. I'm not familiar, but apparently it's a well-known story. Sorry. Next, we have Heather Menzies-Urich as Annabelle. She played the second oldest Von Trapp daughter, Louisa, in The Sound of Music. She also starred with Gregory Harrison on the short-lived television version of Logan's Run. And she was married to SWAT, Vegas, and Spencer for Hire star Robert Urich from 1975 until his passing in 2002. Our villains are played by John Larch, who was in films like Play Misty for Me, Dirty Harry, The Wrecking Crew, and The Amityville Horror. Jack Garner, who was James Garner's brother, and therefore in a bunch of Maverick and Rockford Files projects. Conlon Carter of the short-lived The Law and Mrs. Jones, and Combat. And Michael Carr from the Faces of Death movies? Interesting career. Also, he will show up in another ASJ episode as another character. Finally, we have Royal Dano and Claudia Breyer as the Lamberts. Dano did some crazy horror movies later in his career, like Moon of the Wolf, Messiah of Evil, House 2, the second story, Ghoulies 2, and Killer Clowns from Outer Space. He was also in that Al Capone movie that Howard Brown wrote. And Claudia Breyer was a working actress from the 50s to the 80s. One of her last credits is Psycho 2. Queen. And I have another bit part that I want to bring up. The telegrapher in this episode is played by Liam Dunn. You might recognize him as the preacher from Blazing Saddles. He was also in Young Frankenstein and Papillon. What is it with the telegraphers on this show? Boy, that was a ton of information before getting to the episode, wasn't it? It's almost like I don't want to talk about it. But I guess now we have to. Talk about the mostly hazeless episode. Ugh. We have another sneak peek this episode, so it's already like -5 points. It's the kid and some girl riding a horse getting stopped by a group of thieves who get pissed that the kid has a bunch of newspaper clippings instead of money. Cue opening credits. The boys ride into a new town and pass a bank with a sign that says temporarily closed. They're being watched by the same group of guys from the sneak peek. They meet up with Greer, who is very nervous but does a pretty good job at making sure the boys are on the up and up. They've been hired by a Colonel Harper to transport $50,000 across 400 miles to the town of Kingsburg. Greer withdrew it just before the bank closed. He warns the boys that they are being watched and that the boys should come back at 3 a.m. Yeah, that'd be a hard pass from me. 3 a.m.? Absolutely not. If I'm awake at 3 a.m., it's because I can't sleep, so I'm on my couch watching Starsky and Hutch for comfort. But they agree because they're hoping that this gig will get them in the governor's good graces. They come back at that insane hour and catch and tie up one guy who actually was waiting for them so he could swipe the money. Sadly, the guys who had been watching earlier are still there. Greer has them count the money and sign a receipt. The money's all there. They stick it in a saddlebag. Greer wishes them luck and sends them on their way. They take off on their horses and are immediately followed by our villains. The kid hangs back with the money and Hayes leads the bad guys on a chase so he can get away. And you will notice there is some pretty terrible day for night, and that is a consistent problem on this show. The men catch up with Hayes after his horse stumbles. He plays it pretty cool, but still gets his ass kicked, but good. He doesn't tell them where the kid went, but unfortunately, they hear a train rolling through, and they figure that he probably jumped on. And he did. They're right. That's what he did. I do wonder if they were really going to kill Hayes if he didn't tell them. I think Hayes would have told the truth if he really believed he was about to die, but only to buy himself some time so he could think of a brilliant plan later. As it is, they leave him alone, and he sets out after them. On the train, Kid discovers that he's not alone. There's another stowaway on board, a young woman named Annabelle. She claims she's running away from a wealthy society man who wants to marry her. Kid gets her to admit that she's only 17. She wanted an adventure and wanted to meet the common people. She claims that it's the only way to have an authentic experience. Sure, Jan. Also, I know this was a different time, and 17 is the age of consent in some places, but I really dislike the fact that she's a love interest to the kid. It's kind of gross, considering that both she acts so young, and that he treats her so young. And while I'm talking about Annabelle, I'm going to read you all a quote from Heather Menzies-Urich about her experience on the show and about Pete Duel. Of course, the Alias Smith and Jones episode I did was quite a long time ago. Just about all of my scenes were with Ben. However, I do remember Pete as a bright and charismatic guy with an impish sense of humor. His girlfriend was lovely and a constant supportive presence on the set. He was a true professional despite vague rumors of excessive drinking. I never saw any evidence of that and was shocked upon learning of his suicide. It's really none of my business, but at the time, I couldn't help but think it had to have been a self-inflicted accident of some sort. End quote. I'm not going to speculate on Pete's suicide out of respect, but I did want to share that with you all. Back to the episode. Every once in a while, they will cut back to Hayes riding along with his horse and the kid's horse trailing behind them, just to remind us that, he still exists. Back on the train, the kid's appetite starts to get to him. And the kid does have quite an appetite. I don't know if I've brought that up yet, but it's a thing with him. The train makes a pit stop for water, and he decides to see if he can catch some food before they get moving again. He stupidly leaves the saddlebag with the $50,000 in the car with Annabelle. He catches food, but he doesn't make it back to the train because the brakeman spots him and kicks him off. The kid doesn't have the best of luck with train hopping. He still has enough money of his own to buy a horse and go after the money that is now out of his possession. He doesn't end up catching up. Instead, he finds Annabelle walking along the railroad track in the opposite direction, with her bag and his saddlebag. He checks to see if the money is there, and thankfully it is. He gives her his jacket, and she says she jumped off because she was lonely and hungry. She's definitely crushing on him. But there is no food because the kid already ate all of it, and that makes her hangry. I don't blame her. The pair come across the Lambert home, a sweet old couple who offer to help them out. They ask what they're doing out in the middle of nowhere at that time of night, and the kid kind of stumbles, but Annabelle quickly lies that they're on their honeymoon and the wagon broke down, and then she turns on the waterworks, and the Lamberts invite them in and feed them. It's a good thing she was around, because I guess the kid isn't that great at linking up a lie on the spot. This is why he needs Hayes. At dinner, Annabelle goes on and on about how they're gonna have kids and they want 3, and then the kid asks about the Lamberts' children. The couple share a knowing look, and Mr. Lambert says that they never had any. Mrs. Lambert changes the subject and invites them to spend the night in their barn. The kid has let the saddlebag out of his sight again, and Mr. Lambert has moved their things. He takes them back to keep it close. And, for being so worried about the money, which he should be, he keeps leaving it just lying around. Kid and Annabelle settle down for the night. She can't get warm, so she cuddles up to him. She insists it doesn't mean anything, and she's only cold. She's so gone on him, and I get it. As a teenager, if I met a man like him, who looked like him, yeah, I'd feel pretty swept away. But here's the thing. The kid has been treating her like a child or a little sister this whole time. And when the kid is interested in a woman, you know it. He's very gentle and sweet, goes really hard with the sweet talking and walking her to her room, and he's just all around very romantic. He's good at wooing. He doesn't do any of that with Annabelle. Like, she's snuggled right up against him, and he's genuinely only interested in sleeping. And it should have stayed that way. Kid tells her that he doesn't buy her high society act. She says she is running away from getting married, and she's going to be with her father. She insists that her father really is an aristocrat. Really? Then where is he, girl? Why isn't he with you and your mother? There's a quick scene with Hayes still looking for the kid that goes nowhere. The guy he asks for help hasn't seen him. So again, I guess they're just reminding us that Hayes exists. The next morning, we're back to the sneak peek scene. Annabelle looks stunned to see the thieves pull out money from the kid's saddlebag. But as he looks closer, only the top bills are money. The rest is just cut up newspaper. And it's hilarious to me that the bad guy keeps flipping through stack after stack after stack, as if somehow he can will it to turn into money if he just believes hard enough. He nearly murders the kid right then and there, so I guess that means he really would have killed Hayes in the beginning, but one of the other guys stops him. They demand to know where the money is. And you know how I just said that the kid was a bad liar? Well, I was wrong. He keeps a straight face and says that Greer must have lied to him and stolen the money himself. He knows this isn't true because he and Hayes counted the money themselves, but he does get the bad guys to believe it. Another one of the thieves recognizes Annabelle as a farm girl, and the man who proposed to her was a wheat farmer. She's embarrassed to be called out like that in front of the kid. The villains ride off, but not before the one who was gonna kill both Hayes and Kid tells them that they're not thieves. They all lost money when the bank closed, and they just want what's theirs. Okay, cool. You were literally seconds away from committing murder. Twice! And a murderer is worse than a thief, my dude. Once they're out of sight, the kid yanks Annabelle off her horse and demands to know what she did with the $50,000. She's insulted and insists she didn't steal anything from him. She didn't even know he had that money on him. She starts crying, and this is the second time so far that one of them has made a woman cry, and also the second time it works. He relents and then moves on to suspecting the Lamberts. Annabelle gets pissed about this, too. She says that they were so nice to them and that accusing them is even worse than accusing her. He does ask her about the wheat farmer, and she says that she just doesn't want that life. She wants to be different. She wants to see different things and talk to different people and not spend her whole life talking about farming. And that's fair. They ride back to the Lamberts, and the kid accuses them of taking the money. I get that he's desperate to get the money back because he'll be in oodles of trouble if he doesn't, but he's really being awful. He searches the Lamberts' whole house. When he comes to a locked door that they really, really don't want him to go in, like, they beg him. He shoves off Mr. Lambert and shoots the door open. Being led by your emotions as often as he is can be a bad thing, too. The room is a child's room, and it's covered in cobwebs. We don't know how long it's been locked up, but years, maybe decades. Nothing is said about what happened, but clearly the Lamberts lost a child. To his credit, once Kid sees this, he's instantly apologetic and promises to fix the lock, and it'll be just the way it was before. Back in the barn, the "we're not thieves" are there waiting for them. God, the poor Lamberts! A fight breaks out when Kid shows up, gun drawn to save the day. My hero, I have missed you so much. Where have you been? Hayes, the Kid, and Annabelle take a train the rest of the way to Kingsburg, where they meet up with Greer. It turns out, no one stole the money. Greer switched the bags out and used them as a decoy so he could transport the money himself. It's not a bad plan, but he probably should have told them about it. The Kid gets ready to deck him, but Hayes holds him back and gets him to cool down. And then he punches Greer himself. I love it. And then Annabelle smacks the Kid, which he kind of deserves. Maybe not for her, but I really can't get over the Lamberts. They were nothing but kind and generous, and he calls them thieves, tears through their house, leads would-be thieves there, and shoots through their dead kid's room. The trio gets to the hotel, and Annabelle asks the concierge if he knows her father. He says he actually does, and he's no aristocrat. He's a gambler, and he works at the saloon. All things considered, Annabelle takes this pretty well. She decides that she's had enough authentic experiences, and she's ready to go home and on the next train back east. The Kid pays for her to get a bath and a change of clothes first. And then it all gets ruined because it cuts to them making out before she gets on the train. Nope. No. Unnecessary. They did not have this kind of relationship. She's too young for him. She just is. She asks them to tell her father that they met her and that she's grown up and happy. The kid asks if she wouldn't rather tell him that herself, and she says, with an admirable sense of self-awareness, that she's not that grown up. The train pulls away and that's the end. It's not terrible, but it's not very good either. The dynamic between the kid and Annabelle is decent, but didn't need to turn romantic. I kind of liked the brother-sister vibe they had going for most of it. And damn it, I wanted justice for the Lamberts. I think they deserve the $50,000 actually. The bad guys are kind of a big bag of nothing. Apparently in the Virginian episode, their motivation is better fleshed out. I couldn't find that episode online, so I'm not sure. But it still loses a lot having them not only split up, but having Hayes nearly absent the entire episode. The show loses its magic without the both of them together. Still, the line of the episode does manage to go to Hayes. When the bad guy asks if Hayes is going to tell him where his partner ran off to, Hayes says, "I sure am going to give it some thought." Smartass. And the episode has to go to the kid because, Hayes is barely there. Next time on Alias Smith and Jones, it's even worse than this. The guys completely separately play a long con on some woman, and you guys, it is so boring. Please pray for me. Research for this podcast comes mainly from the wonderful book Alias Smith and Jones, The Story of Two Pretty Good Bad Men by Sandra K. Segala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Heather Menzies-Urich's quote was pulled from the Pete Duell Memorial site, peteduell.info. Thanks for listening.